Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are going to discuss the cell theory. Okay, let's jump right to it. So, what is the cell theory? The cell theory is the following. There are three theories. One, all living things are made up of cells, and this is what we discussed in the characteristics of life video that you should have seen. Video 1, characteristics of life. That was video number 1. So all living things are made up of cells. That's one. Another cell theory is the second. Cells are the basic units of structure and functions in living things. They are the basic units of structure of living things. Next, new cells come from existing cells or pre-existing cells. So this means that you came from your mom came from your grandmother came from your great-grandmother, and so forth and so forth. So cells don't just come up out of anything. It's a theory that used to be called spontaneous generation, and that was disproven. So cells come from pre-existing cells. So again, what are the cell theories? That all living things are made up of cells. Cells are the basic units of structure and function in living things, and new cells come from existing cells. This is the main thing that the Regents wants to make sure that you understand. Just with this information alone, we are going to practice Regents questions already. Doesn't this page look familiar? Okay, so let's zoom in to number 1. Okay, so let's do number 1. And let's read it carefully. Now you're going to see different versions of the same exact question. Over and over again, they try to flip it around to check and make sure that you understand what is the cell theory. What are the 3 cell theories? Okay, let's read the question carefully though, because they don't bold or underline or highlight anything. It is what it is. What you see here is what you're going to get. So you have to read the question very, very carefully. According to the cell theory, which statement is correct? Okay, viruses are true cells? No. And we're going to talk about viruses in a second, but that is not true. Viruses are not true cells. If anything, it's quite the opposite. So this is not the answer. Cells are basically unlike in structure. This is incorrect. This is not part of the cell theory. Mitochondria are found only in the plant cells. This is not part of the 3 cell theories that we discussed. Cells come from pre-existing cells. Yes, they do. So this answer is D. And if we go back to the cell theory, we specifically saw this one as the answer. New cells come from pre-existing cells, from existing cells. Existing cells or pre-existing cells. So we got that one. All right, let's do number 2. And let us clear our screen. If you are ever curious of what I'm using GoodNotes. Okay, next, we are now doing number 2. Which statement is part of the cell theory? Okay, no problem. Cells are microscopic. That is not part of the cell theory. Cells have definite boundaries. This is not part of the cell theory. Cells require oxygen for metabolism. That's true, but that's not part of the cell theory. We have to remember that that's what it's asking for. Let me do it this way. Cells come from pre-existing cells. Again, that is the answer. So 2 is D. Let's clear the page and go to 3. You're getting the hang of this? It's the same questions asked differently. Okay, this is this is where you have to be careful. Now, not all Regents questions do this italics. They don't always do this. So this one is like one of the rare ones, or I get this from a Regents test bank. And they usually don't have it like this. So this one is very interesting that it does have italics. Okay, so let's read. Which statement describes an exception to the cell theory? Okay, sorry about that. An exception means something that we think it's a cell, but it's not a cell. And this exception, we are specifically talking about virus. Scientists are still questioning if a virus is considered living or non-living. Some scientists think that it is living, and some scientists think that it's not living. Okay? And the reason why they think it's not living is because in order for them to reproduce, they have to invade a host. And they also don't have like a true cell body, but they do have genetic material. They do have DNA. So this is always going to be the exception to the cell theory of virus. So let's see where we see this as an answer. A, cells arise from previously existing cells. That's not the exception that we just spoke about. The cell is the basic unit of function in animals. That's true, but it's not the exception to the cell theory. Viruses are not composed of cells. This right here is the exception. Viruses are the exception. Let's read D, just in case, letter D. The cell is the basic unit of structure in plants. It is, but that's not the exception, because that was the key to answering this question. So 3 was D. All right, let's check out number 4. Which statement is not part of the cell theory? This sounds to me like an exception. It could be the exception, or it could really be that it's not part of the cell theory. Now let's remind ourselves of the cell theory again. And let's clear this page. Oh, I didn't mean to get rid of all of that. Okay. So let's remind ourselves, all cells, all living things are made up of cells. Every living thing is made up of cells. Cells are the basic unit of structure and function in living things. New cells come from pre-existing cells. Okay, so let's take a look at number 4. Which statement, again, I'm reading this again, which statement is not part of the cell theory? Let's see. Cells are the structural units in living things. Okay, not part, right? So this is part. Cells are the functional units in living things. Yeah. New cells arise from pre-existing cells. Yes, and these two sound alike. So I'm going to keep my eye on B. New cells have nuclei identical to those of pre-existing cells. So this is incorrect. New cells do not have nuclei identical to those of this is a very odd thing to say. This is where you have that knowledge of eukaryotic cells versus prokaryotic cells. Not all cells have a nucleus. Okay? Not all cells have a nuclei or nucleus. And a nucleus is where you have your chromosomes and DNA. So this one doesn't sound right. And for number 4, this is the one that's not part of the cell theory, but not just because of what we just said here, but because we know the 3 cell theories, and this is not what was discussed in those 3 cell theories. We never said anything about nuclei, identical, nothing like that. So the answer to number 4 is D. See, you have to know your information in order for you to get these right. Okay, let's keep going. We are now doing number 5. Viruses are considered an exception to the cell theory because they normally reproduce by binary fission. No. Only in host cells. Yes. Host is the key word. Sexually by forming seeds. Absolutely not. Asexual by forming spores. No. We know that viruses can only reproduce when they're in a host cell. That was easy. Okay, let's move on to number 6. Which statement describes an exception to the cell theory? Here we go again. Exception. When you think of exception, you always want to think about the virus, but it has to explain the virus correctly at the same time. Plants and animals are made up of structural units known as cells. That is not the exception. Mitochondria, it's already going in a bad way. Let's see. Mitochondria and chloroplasts contain genetic material and can replicate. That's not the exception we spoke about. Let me just read this again just in case, because I don't see virus here. Which statement describes an exception to the cell theory? All cells arise from pre-existing cells. That is not an exception. The cell is the basic functional unit of all living things. I have a feeling that this is an error question because the virus is supposed to be here. Let me see. Mitochondria and chloroplasts contain genetic material. I don't think that this one was particularly speaking about viruses. It's probably asking, let's clear this again. It's probably asking, this is why you have to be careful, and this is why I love making these videos, because we learn the trickery that they try to do in order to make sure you know what you're reading. So I guess what they're saying is which is not the one that's the cell theory. So, but the problem that I'm having is that, okay, so plants and animals are made up of structural units. Yes, this is correct. Mitochondria and chloroplasts contain, the cell theory doesn't talk about genetic material. So we're gonna take a look at B. Cells arise from pre-existing cells. That is part of the cell theory. It's not an exception. The cell is a basic functional unit. This is part of the cell theory. That's not an exception. So 6 is B. Any kind of correction that I have to make, ladies and gentlemen, I will make that correction written in the description. Okay, this is as real as it gets, guys. This is a real teacher going over real questions live. So if there's anything that I find out, because sometimes these questions are also changed around by other teachers that use the same program, the same Regents bank. So I got to make sure that number 6 is correct. I guess they use exception for both viruses and when it's not the cell theory. All right, let's do number 7. Living things contain units of structure and function that arise from pre-existing units. This statement best describes, oh gosh, the cell theory. Hello. Come on, guys. Even you knew that was coming. Not the lock and key of an enzyme. Concepts of natural selection, no. Heterotroph, nope. This one was an easy one. I like number 7. I hope you get easy questions like that when you take the Regents. Okay, let's read number 8. Number 8. The cell theory states that all cells have nuclei that contain genetic information. Okay, so once again, this is a question about the cell theory. Which one is the cell theory, part of the cell theory? It's not this one. B, living organisms are composed of cells that arise from yes, that is the cell theory. All cells regenerate and contain the same basic structures. This is not part of the cell theory. Organisms that lack certain organelles reproduce that is not part of the cell theory. The best answer for number 8 was B, that all living organisms are composed of cells that arise from pre-existing cells. And as you can see, guys, that was this one. New cells come from pre-existing cells. Okay, let's clear screen, clear page. Oh, I see viruses for number 9. So we are doing number 9. Viruses are exceptions to the cell theory, but they have some characteristics of living things. What is one of those characteristics? Okay, so before we even look at the answers, just know that viruses have DNA. They have DNA inside of their body, whatever. Scientists don't want to call it a cell. They also reproduce. So even though they're not considered living, they're not considered cells, they do reproduce and they do have DNA. They need a host cell to reproduce, but they still reproduce and living things do that. So let's see which one they chose as an answer. A. They are made up of many specialized cells. They are not. Definitely not. I'm going to extra take this one off. This also feels nice to do. They contain genetic material. They do contain genetic material. They do contain DNA. They reproduce by mitosis. So, they do reproduce, yes, but not by mitosis. Because mitosis is when one splits into two, right? But that's not what they do. They need a host cell. So this one's turning into a high level question, because you really need to know your viruses and how they reproduce in order to answer number 9. They do not. So reproduce by mitosis is incorrect. They contain chlorophyll, incorrect. So the best answer, let me make this neater. The best answer for number 9 is B. They contain genetic material. All right, let's clear page. Ooh, number 10 has a nice, beautiful cell to look at. So let's take a look at number 10. Which organelle in the diagram below represents an exception to the cell theory because it contains genetic material and can reproduce within the cell? Okay, so this question is asking which organelle, which cell structure is the exception to the cell theory because it contains genetic material. If you get confused by the cell theory and the exception, let me make this smaller. Cell theory and exception. I want you to focus on something. I want you to focus on genetic material, okay? There's only one organelle that contains genetic material. The big one is the nucleus, right? But there is another one that contains genetic material. The other organelle that contains genetic material is this one. Do you know this organelle off the top of your head? The powerhouse is called the powerhouse as well. It makes ATP energy. It's the mitochondria. I'm sure you remember that one. So notice how there's nothing pointing to the nucleus. They're pointing to the mitochondria. So the best answer for number 10 is C. Okay, C, because it's pointing to the mitochondria. And that one does have DNA. All right, guys. We are halfway there, but I want to remind you guys to subscribe. Why do I want you to subscribe? I want you to subscribe because you will get notifications of the next video. There's so many more videos that are coming up. So once I upload the videos, you'll get a notification. Another thing is, if you guys do not, if you need more than I think it's this one. Wait, let me see this one. If you guys need more than just my YouTube videos and you need the full class because you have time, you're going to take the test in August or next year, whatever the case may be, I am launching my online class May 11th. And if you buy it between May 11th and May 16th, you can get the early bird special for $99. And this date is very, very special and specific. May 11th is when my online class launches so that you have enough time to finish the course within 6 weeks. So it's you should do it slowly and at the pace that it's meant to be taken, 6 weeks, so that you can be absolutely fully prepared. And this is if my YouTube videos are just not enough. Okay. So let's finish off these 15 questions. We are now at number 11, cell theory video. Let's go. So number 11, which statement is not a part of the cell theory? So take a look at these. Pause the video now and try to answer on your own. Okay, hopefully you pause the video. So which statement is not a part of the cell theory? Let's see. Cells are the basic unit of structure of living things. Cells are the basic unit of structure of living things. Yes, and it's looking for not. Let's highlight that not. Cells are the basic unit of function of living things. Isn't that the same thing as up here? It's down here twice. I didn't even notice that. Cell parts such as chloroplasts are self-replicating. That is not part of the cell theory. Cells come from pre-existing cells, yes. So the best answer for number 11 is C, because that is part of the cell theory. So hopefully you got 11C. Okay, let's do 12. Which organism is considered an exception to the cell theory because it has a non-cellular structure? Oh, we know this. We already know. Come on. It's right there. The virus. The exception. There it is. Clear as day. So 12 was easy. 12 was C, the virus. Okay. Let's do 13. Which factor contributed most to the development of the cell theory? Okay, so now we're moving on to the questions about Hooke. This is the scientist who invented the microscope. So let's get to some microscope questions about the cell theory. Okay. So let's read this again. Which factor contributed most to the development of the cell theory? Let's see. The discovery of many new species, no. The development of advanced techniques to determine the chemical no. You know what I'm looking for, guys. You know what I'm looking for in the answer. The increase in knowledge concerning factors, no. The improvement in microscopes and microscopic techniques, yes, that is what we're looking for when we talk about the factor that contributed most to the development of the cell theory. The microscope, the increased technology, the increased techniques of the microscope and being able to see these cells. Okay, number 14. Which is the correct sequence of historical developments leading to our present knowledge of cells? Okay, so this starts with the compound microscope. Then once the compound microscope was invented and perfected where you can see a cell, then we got the cell theory. So this is 1, this is 2. And then we made the beautiful electron microscope. Google image electron microscope so you can see some pretty cool images. They're just super cool. Okay, so the best answer for 14 is B. That is the correct sequence. All right, guys, we're now up to our last question. Number 15, let's see. The development of the cell theory was most directly related to the improvement of the microscope and microscope techniques. That sounds correct, but let's keep going. Use of a 5-kingdom classification system. Get out of here. Development of the gene chromosome. Nope, bye. Discovery of bacteria. No, it's all about the improvement of the microscope and microscope techniques. These questions will never change. The cell theory is never going to change. This is going to be the same thing over and over again. Guys, subscribe so you can keep getting these amazing videos that I am so proud of doing for you, because I just can't wait to hear how many of you pass this living environment Regents. Subscribe to my channel. Keep watching these videos. Watch all of them. Even if you think that you know the material, is just going to help. And I hope you get an 80 and above. That is the key average that I want you to get. All right, guys.